Welcome, everybody. It's great to have the fans come out and the media members. It's a big day for the Houston Rockets, and we've been obviously working hard to get back to being a championship contender, and we feel like James Harden is a player we can build around. He's absolutely someone that when they see him step into the role of the star of the Houston Rockets, people are going to realize just how good he is.
I'm excited. The sky's the limit for us. We have opportunities to do some great things.
You talked to Dwight Howard. What did he tell you?
He has spoken to the Houston Rockets and informed them that he is coming to Houston to play with James Harden.
They obviously have a difficult time playing with one another, and it doesn't take Einstein to figure that out. Look at the way that James Harden plays. It's not conducive to Dwight Howard's productivity.
Breaking news, Chris Paul has been traded to the Houston Rockets.
Your reaction to Chris Paul agreeing to a sign-in trade to the Rockets?
Who's most to blame for Harden's unhappiness?
To me, it's two people. It's Mike D'Antoni, the coach, and it's CP3, Chris Paul.
The Oklahoma City Thunder agreed to a trade that sends Russell Westbrook to the Houston Rockets, where he will be reunited with former teammate James Harden.
They don't want to play with each other anymore. Russell Westbrook doesn't want to play with James Harden. James Harden doesn't want to play with Russell Westbrook.
John Wall and a future first-round pick to the Rockets for who? Russell Westbrook.
I just don't see how this keeps James Harden wanting to stay in Houston.
He's proud of me. Full of honey buns.
Well, this is what James Harden is doing. He's trying to force his way out of Houston. He does not want to be there.
Okay.
James, what was the point that you were trying to get across when you went to Atlanta and Vegas when training camp was starting?
I was just training.
What were you training for?
It started the NBA season.
How did going to Atlanta and Vegas help you there when the Rockets were starting training camp in Houston?
Just my personal trainers.
Jonathan Fagan.
I love this city. I literally, have done everything that I can. This situation is crazy. It's something that I don't think can be fixed. So, thanks.
NFL Live reporting breaking news. This coming from Adrian Wojnarowski. The Brooklyn Nets have acquired Houston's James Harden in a blockbuster deal.
With the way that James Harden spent his last days with the Rockets, there are a lot of people questioning his legacy in Houston. Did he underachieve, overachieve, or just about meet expectations? The only way to answer that question is to look at his time spent in Houston as a whole. On October 27, 2012, Oklahoma City traded reigning Sixth Man of the Year James Harden to the Houston Rockets. The Thunder were comprised of Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden, a young ascending big three, and were fresh off of a finals appearance. Though, the owner of the Thunder was not willing to pay the necessary luxury tax to extend Harden and to keep the star trio intact. Thus, Sam Presti pulled the trigger on a trade to get some value for him, sending him to Houston. The trade was pulled off by longtime Rockets executive Daryl Morey, who was eyeing Harden for a long time and viewed him as a franchise cornerstone with the potential of becoming a superstar. Going into the 2012-2013 season, the talent around James was lacking. Jeremy Lin was signed after his shocking emergence in New York. He was a good starting point guard, but his play wasn't at the level of Lin's sanity. Chandler Parsons emerged as a young scoring wing with potential, but outside of that, their roster was pretty bleak. Though Harden and the Rockets were able to find success, making the playoffs in a very loaded Western Conference. They were bounced in the first round by OKC, but given the talent level, this season was definitely an overachievement. After seeing success in their first season with Harden as the face of their franchise, Morey and the Rockets were eager to add talent around him. With Dwight Howard being disgruntled in Los Angeles, Houston pounced on an opportunity and signed him on July 13, 2013. This formed an elite inside-out duo on paper. Harden made another improvement, making it to All-NBA First Team for the first time in his career. There was a quality supporting cast as well. Lynn was solid as a backup point guard with Beverly emerging as a defensive starter. Parsons took another step. Terrence Jones was a young, athletic, inside-out power forward with potential. And even though Dwight wasn't the same as he was in Orlando, he was still impactful, especially on the defensive end. The team was great, notching 54 wins, but in a loaded Western Conference that was only enough for a 5th seed. In the playoffs, they faced a very talented Trailblazers team in the first round and lost in 6 games. This was a disappointment because Houston came into the season as title contenders. To get bounced in the first round makes this season underachieving for James and the Rockets. Going into the 2014-15 season, the Rockets did not match the offer for Chandler Parsons and traded away Jeremy Lin, so 2 pretty important pieces of their offense were lost. Throughout the year, Pat Bev, Terrence Jones, and Dwight were struggling with injuries. Houston made midseason acquisitions of Corey Brewer and Josh Smith. The only constant all year for them was James Harden, who had another superb offensive year. Their offense struggled a bit due to injuries, but their defense improved mainly due to the acquisition of Trevor Ariza. Houston was able to finish 56-26 and earn the 2nd seed in the Western Conference. After coming back from a 3-1 deficit against the Clippers in the second round, they were eliminated by the eventual NBA champion Golden State Warriors. The fact that the Rockets found regular season success and marginal postseason success with an injury-riddled team and a regressing Dwight Howard marks this season as an overachievement and a carry job from James Harden. The 2015-16 season was turbulent. Kevin McHale was fired 11 games in. Dwight Howard took a huge regression in his performance, and the chemistry between him and James was fractured. With Howard's regression, Houston's defense took a huge step back, as did their team success. They went 500 on the year and lost to the Western Conference champion Golden State Warriors. With the roster being severely diminished, Dwight hitting another regression, the team chemistry being fried, there wasn't really much that James Harden could do here. So in my opinion, this team met expectations. Going into the 16-17 season, Houston shook up their roster. Howard opted out and did not return. Mike D'Antoni was hired as head coach, and marksmen Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson were signed to fit Mike's new offensive scheme. A rotation of lethal shooters positioned around James Harden, who would now take on the role of the team's point guard. This scheme would give Harden all the spacing in the world to find offense for himself or to hit the open man once the defense collapsed. This season saw James Harden return to the All-NBA first team, lead the league in assists, and finish 2nd in MVP voting. Under Mike's system, the Rockets boasted the league's 2nd best offense. They got 55 wins and finished 3rd in the Western Conference. Their regular season was great, but their postseason is the sole reason for the year as a whole being viewed as an underachievement. In the second round, the Rockets faced the Spurs, where Harden had a major drop-off, averaging 25 points per game on 31% from 3. His play was highlighted by his Game 6 elimination performance, where he put up 10 points, 7 assists, and 6 turnovers on 2 of 11 from the field and 2 of 9 from 3. It was apparent that too much of the offensive burden was on Harden's shoulders. In the offseason of 2017, Morey executed a sign-and-trade to net the point god himself, Chris Paul. With this acquisition, there were questions regarding the fit. CP3 is one of the best mid-range scorers of all time, so there was reason to believe this would conflict with D'Antoni's philosophy of exclusive scoring from behind the three-point line or at the rim. But there was enough give and take from both sides to make the offense work, as the team boasted the best offense in the league. And with improvements from Clint Capella, a returning Trevor Ariza, and adding Luc Mbah a Moute and PJ Tucker with CP3, Houston was no longer an offense-only team, posting the 6th best defensive rating. The Rockets were firing on all cylinders, and even with Paul missing a significant amount of time, the Rockets were the best regular season team because of the stellar play of James Harden, making him the 2019 most valuable player. This season, he asserted himself as a definitive top 5 player in the league. In the postseason, the Rockets made quick work of the Wolves and Jazz in the first 2 rounds, setting up the conference finals that the NBA world expected. Rockets-Warriors. In the series, the Rockets went up 3-2 on the Juggernaut, but the wheels seemed to fall off after CP3 suffered a hamstring injury to sideline him for Game 6 and 7. But despite the loss of Paul, the Rockets still had a great chance to topple the Warriors. In Game 7, for a great part of the game, they had a sizable lead, and then the Rockets proceeded to miss 27 straight threes. 27 consecutive three-point attempts bricked, a playoff record by far. Thus, the Rockets lost and were eliminated. In this loss, Harden put up 32 points, 6 assists on 12 of 29 from the field, and an abysmal 2 of 13 from 3. When examining the season as a whole, the Rockets had the best regular season record in the league, and James Harden was the MVP. And combining that with the fact that in the postseason, Houston lost to one of the most unbeatable teams of all time in 7 games without their second best player for the final 2, I chalk this season up as them meeting expectations. Going into the 2018-19 season, Houston had some problems. CP3 was a year older, and they lost their 2 most versatile defensive pieces, Luc Mbah a Moute and Trevor Ariza. This hurt them greatly as they fell to 17th in defensive rating. They acquired Carmelo Anthony before the season, but that experiment failed miserably 10 games in. Houston was riddled by injuries again as CP3 played only 58 games and Capella played 67. Though the Rockets were able to find moderate team success due to James Harden putting up one of the most impressive offensive performances over a single season in NBA history, where he finished second in MVP voting. The Rockets won 53 games, but faced the Warriors in the second round, where again, the Rockets were eliminated by Golden State. Had the team been healthier throughout the regular season, I believe they would have reached a higher seed and wouldn't have had to face the Warriors until the Western Conference Finals. And considering Harden's historic season and his performance in the series against the Warriors, I don't think too much blame can be placed on his shoulders. James and Houston met expectations this year. Throughout the 18-19 season and throughout the following offseason, tension developed between Harden and Paul, and with James being the franchise player, Morey and Houston chose to offload Chris Paul, and with some influence from Harden, a trade was made to reunite him with his former OKC teammate Russell Westbrook. With the addition of Russ, there were even more questions than when CP3 was added, due to Russ's inability to shoot the 3-ball at all. That concern was justified with the Rockets' slow start to the season. Their offense was still good, but not as high-powered and dynamic as years past. In order to make offense easier for Westbrook, Morey and D'Antoni did something drastic. The Rockets orchestrated a trade that ended in them giving away their quality starting center Clint Capella and not getting one in return. Instead, they got back Robert Covington, one of the most versatile defenders in the league. They opted to start PJ Tucker and Rocco as their bigs, both below the height of 6'8". But because the 2 quote-unquote big men could shoot the ball at an elite level for being bigs, this made offense a lot easier for the Rockets as there were no longer 2 non-threats from 3 on the floor at the same time. As for James Harden, he continued from last season, putting up another ridiculous scoring output. The Rockets were able to finish 44-28, earning the 4th seed. After going 7 games against the Thunder, they were eliminated by the Lakers in 5, who were the eventual NBA champions. This was another year of meeting expectations in my opinion. Teams got much better in the Western Conference, and the Westbrook-Harden backcourt did not work. It also didn't help that Westbrook was physically compromised in the playoffs. So that is a quick summary of James Harden's 8 seasons spent in Houston. Looking at it as a whole, 2 seasons he overachieved, 2 seasons he underachieved, and in the other 4 he simply met expectations. A great majority of Houston's playoff disappointments come from the roster not being talented enough, not fitting well enough, or them just losing to a juggernaut in the Western Conference. So using the simple black and white measuring stick, in my opinion, James Harden met expectations for the most part of his tenure in Houston. So now the most recent events. Over this offseason, Mike D'Antoni and Daryl Morey departed. James Harden and Russell Westbrook no longer wanted to play with one another. New executive Rafael Stone trades Brody for John Wall, replacing a lot of talented loss and losing Westbrook, but also garnering an extra first-round pick. He also made an acquisition of the young, surging big man Christian Wood. Stone got him on a steal of a contract, and Wood has been very impressive, an early candidate for most improved player. They also got DeMarcus Cousins on a minimum deal. With a fully bought-in James Harden, this could have been a very competitive team in the West. But Harden did not buy in. In fact, he did quite the opposite. He demanded a trade in the offseason, and since then, he did everything in his power to force his way out of Houston, repeatedly violating COVID-19 protocols, showing up late to training camp, coming in out of shape, not playing up to his standard at the beginning of the season, and publicly giving up on the team. It's not a red flag on a superstar's legacy to want out of a team after constant postseason disappointment, but there are so many better ways of going about leaving a team, and Harden's method was not one of them. His behavior as a professional was flat out unacceptable and childish, and he caused a lot of turmoil and awkwardness in Houston's locker room and amidst the organization. Harden conducted himself poorly in an attempt to get traded. He underperformed multiple times in the playoffs, but that should not overshadow all that he did for the Houston Rockets. His arrival single-handedly put them on the map and made them an automatic playoff team. And once he got a star to partner up with him, the Rockets were perennial championship contenders. Obviously, this was an ugly exit, but once the immediate reactions fizzle out and the smokescreen is cleared, I think Rocket fans will realize the tremendous impact that James Harden had on their franchise.